If everybody can take their seats, we'll go ahead and get started. I apologize for the delay, but we'll make it up toward the end. So I would just like to, again, thank you all for coming to this panel called Transportation Equity, Access, and Opportunity. We have a great slate of panelists who will talk to you about how transportation intersects with civil rights. So I think it's going to be a very, very good panel. My name is Dr. Richard Ezeki. I currently serve as a State Farm Transportation Fellow at Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And in my role, I do policy analysis focusing on the intersection of transportation, sustainability, and equity. And so that is the bulk of my work. I wanted to first thank our two sponsors for this panel, State Farm Insurance and BYD Company Limited, for, again, the support and also the food that you are eating today, because it is 12:30 and we all are hungry in the middle of lunch, so I know you guys want to eat. I also want to thank the Center for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for the opportunity to do this research that I'm currently doing right now, and also the support for getting this panel together. And I hope everybody is looking forward to the discussion. So without further ado, I would like to first bring up our representative from State Farm Insurance, Vice President Victor Enger, and I'll talk a little bit about him. Excuse me. Okay. So Vice President Enger serves as Vice President of Sales with State Farm Insurance, based in Fairfax, Virginia. And his responsibilities include executive and sales oversight for the Washington metro area, and he is a proud member of the board of directors at Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. So, Vice President Andrew, please come up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Enjoying the lunch? All right, you are welcome. Hey, as Richard mentioned, my name is Victor Eng. I'm Vice President of Sales in this Washington metro area, and then more importantly, I'm a proud board member of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and have been for a few years. I'd like to commend any board members if they're here, and I'll also like to just commend my State Farm partners. Say hello. I also like to thank a person who I just met, Ms. Grindley Johnson, our Deputy Secretary of Virginia Department of Transportation, who will be our moderator today for the panel. So on behalf of 88,000 State Farm agents and employees, we're once again proud to sponsor this, but also we've been a continued partner of Congressional Black Caucus for many years. We sponsor the Communication Internship Program, where we bring interns up to get experience on the Hill. But just about over a year ago, the foundation approached us about sponsoring a transportation fellow. And obviously we accepted, and they hired the talented Dr. Richard Ezeki. And as he said, under the Center of Policy Analysis and Research Division of the foundation, and looking forward to listen to the things that he's brought together and the work that he's putting together, and we're excited about that. Obviously, as the nation's #1 auto insurance cover, it's obvious that transportation is important to us. With 44 million autos on the road, I think safety and those things are important to us. But not only that, as I mentioned, our 88,000 agents and employees, it's important that they have the ways and means to come to work. And I think we know how important this topic is, and that's what we're here today to talk about. So I'd just like to thank the esteemed panel that's going to have this discussion today, and for contributing your time and expertise, as I mentioned, on this important topic. And I look forward to hearing some meaningful dialogue and some things that can lead to some effective solutions in our neighborhoods and for the African American community. So thank you again for coming here to this session, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Enger. Next, I would like to bring up a representative from our second company, BYD Company Limited. And his name is Macy Nashati, and he currently serves as a Senior Vice President for Heavy Industries at the company, and is involved in the heavy equipment and transit industry for over 35 years when he joined the Northern California distributor for Detroit Diesel in 1979. He's been, after working with the Detroit Diesel and Allison Distributor Network for nearly 15 years in various roles, he joined Complete Coach Works as Vice President of Sales and Marketing and led the company to a sales growth over 700% during his tenure. And he previously led the BYD company's coach and bus unit, which was responsible for a significant portion of the company's revenue growth in North Carolina. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Shati to the stage.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I want to tell you what an honor and a privilege it is to be here with you at the 46th Annual Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and to be talking at the same podium with such a distinguished group of panelists. I feel somewhat inadequate. But I do really quickly want to tell you that our company, BYD, is very focused on economic justice and sustainability. Our electric buses are zero emission. As you know, most of the transit systems serve a great deal of our lower income neighborhoods, so that's where all this diesel pollution tends to end up. And also ports, industrial areas where they operate lots of forklifts. So we're into the whole lineup of vehicles. We have zero emission buses, trucks, forklifts, and cars. And we put our money where our mouth is. So one of the things that we were the first OEM to stop charging for training material, manuals, workforce development. We've always looked at our competitors' bids after we either win or lose. We go in and do a debrief, which you're legally entitled to do. And we noticed that people were charging $150,000 to $200,000 for training manuals, and another $150,000 to $200,000 for training itself. And we felt like, well, when you sell new technology or even old technology to a community, you owe it to them to train them on how to use the equipment, to develop their workforce, to teach their mechanics how to work on it, to teach the bus operators how to benefit from a zero-emission bus. So as of this December of this year, we stopped charging for all that. That's a very hard dollars and cents contribution to each community we sell buses to. And we feel a much more equitable use of tax dollars, because as you know, 80% of most transit agencies get their money from federal funding, 80% of the funding. So that's every one of us is paying taxes into every transit system across the nation. So we feel like we owe it to the country and to that community to provide workforce development, to provide the training manuals, to help them adopt the technology and make it successful. So we're very committed to environmental justice. We're very committed to sustainability, and it's an absolute privilege to be here with you today. And hopefully, as time goes on, I'll be able to tell you more about what we're doing to promote those activities. So it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Nishati. I then would like to introduce the 20th Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation, Victor Mendez, and I'll give a little bit of bio by him. As I mentioned, the 20th Deputy Secretary of the United States, and he has served in that position since July 30th of 2014. He is in the department's chief operating officer and is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the 10 modal administrations and the work of more than 55,000 U.S. DOT employees nationwide and overseas. In addition to his work with external stakeholders, this Deputy Secretary has made employee engagement a top priority at the department. Before becoming Deputy Secretary, he served as the administrator for the Federal Highway Administration since July of 2009, where he oversaw the agency's 2,900 employees in Washington and field offices across the country. And before he joined the U.S. DOT, he served as the director of the Arizona Department of Transportation. So without further ado, Deputy Secretary Victor Mendez.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Thanks for inviting me. And I do want to say on behalf of Secretary Fox at USDOT, he sends his regards. Right now he's recovering from what I call minor knee surgery. If it was my knee, it would probably be major, but I think for him it's minor. So he did want to make sure that I do convey his regards to all of you, and thanks for inviting USDOT to the table with you. I also want to say, I've been having trouble with my throat. So if you see me, clearing my throat and such, please bear with me. It's just one of those things. One of the things that I think we all need to think about, of course, is transportation and how we interface with our communities throughout the entire country, of course, and the impacts that we can potentially have on our communities. So I'm going to talk about that, talk about a few things that we are doing at USDOT to address the issues, and then I guess after that we turn it over to our distinguished panel. So there are many pressing issues that are in fact are affecting our communities, and we will continue to face these issues. And some of these issues revolve around opportunity, upward mobility, sustainable communities, and many other pressing challenges. But really, when you think about transportation, it is a foundation for all of these challenges, and really for many other things that are connected to transportation. It's no secret that transportation right now is at a very pivotal moment because there are a lot of factors that are converging, not just in today's world, but also as we look toward the future and we think about solutions for future challenges. And so as we think about transportation right now, we also need to be thinking about what happens in the future. At USDOT, about a year and a half ago, we released a report that we call Beyond Traffic. It is a report that looks at anticipated changes in transportation over the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And we estimate that by the year 2045, our population throughout the country will grow by 70 million people. That's 70. And so that means that you're going to have 70 million more people competing for lane space on our roadways and really entering our train stations and really competing for a lot of our space that we have on buses. So the question for us, of course, as a nation is, are we prepared for that? And if not, what are we doing to prepare for that? In addition to that, we anticipate that by the year 2045, our freight volumes will increase somewhere between 45 to 50%. So you couple an increasing population of 70 million and increasing volumes of freight, and you begin to see very quickly that we will have some challenges on transportation. And so that's why at USDOT we've been working very hard to support communities in our efforts to really modernize our transportation networks. But one question we really have been very focused on, and I'm sure all of you have been as well, is how do we use transportation to promote opportunity for our minority communities and many others that are out there throughout the entire country. You look at patterns and what's happening as we look toward the future, and you find very quickly that the way we live and the way we're moving and where we're moving to, where we're living, actually is changing and will continue to change. I think all of you are aware that last December, President Obama signed the FAST Act. And so under that act, we've been very hard at work to give states the ability really to be able to fund their projects in a more certain manner. I think one of our challenges was mentioned in my bio. I used to be the director at Arizona DOT. So as a practitioner, I know how difficult it is to really plan for major projects or major initiatives when you don't really have funding certainty. And so prior to the FAST Act, we had MAP 21, but we also had many extensions in between, and that's really not a good recipe for long-term planning. So through FAST, it gave us a little bit of certainty, 5 years, and so we're working very hard to implement the FAST Act altogether. We're also supporting metropolitan areas throughout the country as we see more and more urbanization continue to happen. For example, in Chicago, Illinois, home to the second largest African-American population in the U.S., we just awarded a $25 million Tiger Grant that will fund the Garfield Gateway Station project. This grant will assist in restoring Garfield Boulevard in an economically distressed neighborhood with the infrastructure that it needs to make the neighborhood pedestrian and traffic friendly, while at the same time refurbishing many important parts of that Chicago history. More importantly, this grant will in fact improve the quality of life for the residents in the community. And everyone in this room, I think, we all recognize and know that the gap between the poor and the wealthy when it comes to income and considering the middle class, that gap is widening. The gap really does not know any boundary. It's not confined to race. It's not confined to geography. The gap exists throughout the entire country. And unless we do something about it, which we should be doing something about it now, it will continue to grow. It does threaten the core of the American dream, the idea that no matter where you come from, that you can still make it in America if you work hard and you play by the rules. And we have heard that time and time again. And so we're very focused on trying to be part of that solution. And the truth is that transportation planning decisions of the past have, in fact, had a significant role in creating this opportunity gap. A few generations ago, we made many transportation infrastructure decisions, whether it came to building highways, airports, seaports, railways, and on, that in fact had a negative impact on our neighborhoods and communities. Many of these decisions actually, as we know now, did in fact impact minority and low-income neighborhoods. In Arizona, from my experience, I remind people, I didn't make these decisions on I-10 back in the day. But when I was director, people in Phoenix and in Tucson in those neighborhoods always came to me and said, you know, you guys made these choices, these decisions, and you divided my community. So one of the things that we want to do at USDOT through the implementation of our programs is to find a way as we move into the future, not only to improve transportation, which is one of the core issues, we want to improve safety, and of course we want to make sure that where we can, we improve our neighborhoods and try and amend some of those decisions that were made in the past. It's not only our obligation as an organization and our responsibility, but quite frankly, we believe it's the right thing to do. As I mentioned, we're working very hard to implement FAST, many tools that we actually can utilize within FAST to expand opportunity, including new workforce programs, eligibility to support transit-oriented development with our core credit programs, and many other tools and funding for local planners. Just recently at DOT, we opened up the Build America Bureau, which is responsible for being the driving force for major infrastructure development projects throughout the country. The Bureau will be able to provide a more hands-on approach towards credit opportunities and grants for all of these major projects that are very, very important for all of us throughout the country. Through the Bureau, we have already provided credit opportunities for African American communities and many other communities for that matter, utilizing one of our credit programs that is known as the TIFIA loan program. From Detroit's M1 rail project to the construction of Houston's Grand Parkway, we're working hard to make sure that our communities have the ability to fully engage with the American dream by connecting them to opportunity. The Bureau also manages the FastLane program. We just released last week and made it official. The first round of our FastLane grants, $800 million, that will be combined with other sources of funding at both, or I should say many other elements, federal, state, local, and private funding that was leveraged through our FastLane program and actually leveraged up to $3.6 billion in infrastructure. And that includes DC as well, the District of Columbia. So it's many initiatives like these that if we utilize them smartly, we can always leverage our funding ability with other funding sources that are out there to actually build infrastructure that is critical for all of us. We also focus a lot within USDOT on small business opportunities. This has earned us through the SBA for the last, since 2009, a rating of A or A+ because of the work that we have done and the goals that we have been able to reach. In 2015, African American owned disadvantaged business enterprise received over $639 million worth of contracts that were led by recipients of the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. This amount represents over 800 contracts to DBEs that are owned by African American women and over 3,500 contracts throughout the country to DBEs owned by African American men. So as you can see, when we actually use our money wisely, we can leverage many other opportunities beyond just the funding that's available here and now. So today we are working to eliminate many of these barriers that do exist for small businesses and minority businesses. We do provide a short-term lending program and a very, very popular and important program that from my perspective, is very important for small businesses, and that is a bonding education program. In fact, Secretary Fox has made it a priority to support projects that diminish the opportunity gaps in many of our communities. We know how important it is for all of us to work collectively so that we can make decisions in the future, planning decisions as we implement our transportation initiatives. For example, in Flint, Michigan, we know how important that is. That is played out over and over, probably for the last year now. That is home to 60% African American majority. Roads and sidewalks, along with water lines that follow it, will be reconstructed, and that is being handled through a $20 million drinking water revolving fund of a roadway construction project from our Tiger grant. So once again, we're leveraging transportation dollars with other sources of funding to actually reinvigorate and respond to some neighborhood issues. So we're very proud of many of our initiatives. A lot of good things are happening, but we also recognize that the federal government alone cannot fix everything, and I think we know that. So it's going to be important for all of us to continue to work together collectively in partnership so that we can address some of these issues that we face, again, as I mentioned earlier, not just today, but how does the future look for us? And so we always have to be thinking about, not just the next 5 years or 10 years, but really beyond that as well. So as we're trying to do on a regional basis as well, working with regional planning bodies to make sure that we make decisions that do address those issues as well. We want to make sure that regions aren't just stapling together a list of projects and saying, oh, that's the plan, and move forward with it. We want to make sure that there is some good insight, good planning, that actually, and good dialogue with our public engagement efforts to make sure that we are in fact addressing issues and not just, as I said, piecing things together and then saying, oh, here's a plan. So we need to be responding very directly to the needs within our community, and that means we need to align a lot of our resources with a lot of our good ideas and really some planning processes that are important for all of us. So I do want to say once again, thank you to everyone for inviting us, for allowing us to be here with you. I do want to end on one final note, and that's on the issue of safety. At USDOT, many of you, I'm sure, have heard us say that safety is our highest priority. Always has been, always will be. At USDOT, we have 10 different agencies, different modes of transportation. We have aviation, public transportation, maritime, highways, on and on, 10 of these. And there's one thing that Secretary Fox reminds us about all the time. Within USDOT, it doesn't matter where you work. When you wake up, we all have, 55,000 of us, have one common bond, and that is safety. So when you're out there driving around, I want to ask all of you to please do 4 things that I think will make us safer on our roadway. First and foremost, I need for all of you to please buckle up when you're driving around. I will tell you from personal experience, seatbelts make a big, big difference. I know for our insurance sponsors here, it's very important for all of us to focus on safety. And so we're very focused on that. Secondly, asking all of you to please put away your cell phones when you're out there driving around. Distracted driving, trying to answer email and being on the phone, not a good equation for safety. So I think we're always reminding all of you for that. More recently, we have had an uptick in fatalities and injuries when it comes to bicyclists and pedestrians. So I'm asking all of you, when you're out there driving around, be especially aware of pedestrians and bicyclists. And I like to run, and once in a while I say, watch out for the joggers too, because they do silly things sometimes, but be especially careful. And then fourth and final point, please drive safely. I think if we all do just 4 simple things, we all, including our families and friends, would be much safer out there. So again, I do want to say thank you all for inviting me and inviting the department. I know Stephanie Jones from USDOT will be on our panel, so she'll talk a little bit more about more detail probably about what we're doing. So thank you all, and have a good panel. Thanks.
Thank you for these comments, Deputy Secretary Mendez. So although I mentioned we're a little bit behind, there is not a session after this one, so it's okay if we run a little bit late. Just want to point that out. Another housekeeping, we have a volunteer in the back. Hello? What's your name? Darlene. Hi, Darlene. So she will be our official timekeepers to make sure that we stick to our schedules, so panelists. Just wanted to point that out for you. So when she waves her hand like you have 1 or 2 minutes left, please acknowledge that. All right, so I'd like to then introduce our moderator, Deputy Secretary of the Virginia Department of Transportation, Gwendolyn Johnson, and she will introduce herself and the panel.
Good afternoon. All right, guys, we're going to be here till 2:30. We got an hour and a half to go. We need a little energy in this room. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yes, Mr. Moore, I see you back there smiling. I am Gwendolyn Johnson. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are responsible for 7 agencies, and I have to write them down to remember them. I'm sorry. The Virginia Department of Transportation, Highways, Department of Rail and Public Transportation, the Department of Motor Vehicle, the 3rd largest port in the country, Aviation, Motor Vehicle Dealer Board, and we have a spaceport. We send supplies to the space station, so we launch missiles and Wallops Island. So Virginia has it all. I am also the chairperson of the AASHTO Civil Rights Subcommittee, which is comprised of all of the civil rights organizations for the DOTs. And what we do there, our primary focus is DBEs and Title VI. We try to share information and try to influence and shape the future. Now, civil rights is my passion. I really like civil rights. I didn't know I was going to love it when I got there, but you know, there's always a plan for you, and I have found a plan. I don't mind getting up, going to work every day, because I get to have a positive impact on the lives of others. Every now and then, I have a little negative impact, but primarily, it is a positive impact. I really love working with DBEs. To me, you know, small businesses, that's our future. And I thoroughly enjoy working with them, and I'm very proud to say we've done some good things, not only in Virginia, but we've done some good things around the country. We have been able to forge a partnership with HNTB. And, you know, every time there's a project, a road project in Hampton, well, in Virginia, it's going to have some sort of tolls because we never have enough money. So roads that are built these days are going to have some sort of toll. And we got tired of always carving out the tolling component because there were never DBEs who had the expertise to do it. So I have forged a partnership with HNTB that will work with DBEs around the country to try to mentor them, to try to get them the experience. They started off in Virginia. They have one person in Virginia they're working with. They have someone in Florida and someone in Texas. And this is a pilot program, but these are the things that we have to do to get ready for the future. It cannot always be about what we used to do. We have got to stay relevant, because if you're going to have a small business, you got to be relevant, and you have to stay abreast of the newest technology. Now, I am a baby boomer. Oh, is that giving me, I'm talking too much. I'm a baby boomer, but I'm a millennial at heart. That was not a joke. But I grew up in segregation, and I'm gonna make this real quick. I grew up in segregation, so I lived in a segregated neighborhood. Didn't know I was poor till I went to school, college that is. But there was an interstate that divided my neighborhood. You know, I never paid much attention to it then, but it actually divided our neighborhood. And you know, in segregation, you don't want to separate us. We were trying to get together. So, you know, after I started working in transportation is when it dawned on me, that is what I'm working for. That is what I'm trying to do, so that will not happen to anyone else. And with that, that's my bio. I am now very pleased to say, that we have a distinguished panel. I'm very pleased that I'm not a panelist because once I looked at the credentials of those on the panel, I got a little intimidated. And you know, I'm not intimidated easily. But guys, we have some very sharp individuals here. And now I would like to introduce them. And as I introduce you, I would like for you to come up. And after you come up, I'm going to give each of you 3 minutes to introduce yourself. The first person that I would like to introduce is Dr. Robert Bullard. Come up, please, sir. This is the father of environmental justice. He's written 18 books. I've already given him my business card. I would also like to introduce Anita Cozart. She established a Transportation Equity Caucus, National Coalition, and I'm very proud to have her here today. Also would like to introduce Malcolm Glenn. He's from Uber, modern technology. He worked for Uber and Google. I've already given him my business card for my next job. I would also like to introduce Stephanie Jones from USDOT. I consider Stephanie a friend. We've been on many panels together, and when I'm in a jam, she's always there for me. And I consider her the mother of the ladders of opportunity, because I know she's going to talk to us about that. And let's see, who am I missing here? Tara Ritas. Now, Tara, I met her when she was in Kentucky, and I looked, I said, that's a smart, sharp young lady. You know, I need to mentor her. But you know, as it's gone on, I think she's now mentoring me. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel. And Tara, I will start with you and give us a brief introduction. Each one of you had 3 minutes. I went over my time, so I know you guys will not.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Grinley. I'll keep it very brief. Can everyone hear me now? Can you hear me now? No? What about now? Okay. As Grinley mentioned, I'm a native of Louisville, Kentucky. I was working in transportation there, civil rights. Prior to that, I was practicing law. I did civil rights litigation for about 6 years for the state government in Kentucky before I was introduced to transportation. I have been with DDOT here in the district for about 4 months, so still learning the lay of the land, but very excited about my role at DDOT. My title is Equity and Inclusion Officer. And so one of my responsibilities is to make sure that DDOT is thinking about equity and inclusion with all of our programs, services, and activities from day one, so that we can avoid those issues that Grinley talked about with the highways going through the disadvantaged communities. But I'm looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Stephanie Jones. I'm Senior Counselor to the Secretary and Chief Opportunities Officer at the U.S. Department of Transportation. A lot of people ask, what is a Chief Opportunities Officer? And it's understandable that you would ask, because this is the first, Secretary Fox has created this position. This is the first Chief Opportunities Officer in federal government. He created this position because he wanted to be sure that we are institutionalizing opportunity and equity into everything we do at the Department of Transportation. It's important that we realize that this is not just this is not just a singular issue, and it's not something that should be reserved just for the Office of Civil Rights or just for the diversity folks in our department, but it has to weave through everything we do. I first came to the department about 2.5 years ago as Deputy Chief of Staff, and I immediately saw, in working with the Secretary, how important it was that we make sure that we integrate opportunity into everything that we do. The Secretary has, from the time that he started, made the ladders of opportunity a key priority, and he has done just an absolutely remarkable job in getting it infused into not just into the organization, but also with all of our stakeholders across the country. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today, where we can talk about how we can make sure that we continue this work, because I'll be leaving the department, the secretary will be leaving the department, Grinley will be leaving, and she stays a little bit longer than we do.
January 17th.
Yes. She's got a year more than we do, but it's really, you all are really going to be our foot soldiers, and it's going to be important that you carry this out and continue this work. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion and great many opportunities to work together in the future.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Very good. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for the opportunity to be here for convening this very important conversation. Thank you to Deputy Secretary Johnson for the very kind introduction. And yes, you do indeed have my business card. And I also want to make a quick plug. If you are taking Uber this week to and from CBC events, you can use a special promotion code that will give you a 10% off discount for every single ride you take to and from CBC events. We'll also donate $1 for every single ride taken to the CBCF Scholarship Fund. That code is CBCF ALC 16, again, CBCF ALC 16, and we hope you'll take advantage of it so we can give back to CBC. Thank you for that partnership, everyone who's involved with the foundation. As mentioned, my name is Malcolm Glenn, and I do strategic partnerships for Uber. What that means is working with organizations that help underserved communities, whether that's from the standpoint of a driver looking for a flexible work opportunity, or from riders, obviously, looking for transportation. And obviously, we'll focus on that latter bit in the conversation we have today. And I just want to tell you a very brief story about how I got to Uber, which helps inform the way I think about transportation equity, opportunity, and access. And so, as Deputy Secretary Johnson mentioned, my previous employer was Google. I was working in San Francisco, living in a historic neighborhood called the Mission District. It was traditionally majority minority, and for a whole host of generations, people have lived and worked in the Mission District. But as a result of the throes of gentrification, a lot of those folks have been priced out of where they've lived for a really long time. The San Francisco housing market is the most expensive in the country, and people have been priced out of where they've lived away from public transportation, which has made getting to their jobs in the city center that much more difficult. Obviously, it's very difficult to invest in public infrastructure, housing and transportation. It costs a lot of money. It requires a great deal of political will, and it's hard to make the argument to folks that short-term disruption is going to yield long-term gains. And so you've seen an absence of that in San Francisco and in the Broad Bay area, and increasingly in other cities across the country. And what really struck me was the ability of a company like Uber to build a transportation network on top of the existing infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, and how that has profoundly impacted underserved communities. And why is this really so important? Why at a core level are we having this conversation? And I'm struck, and part of the reason I came to Uber was because of this statistic that I saw, which came out of a Harvard study from about a year ago, which said that the single most significant contributing factor to whether a family can take itself out of poverty is commute time. Mm-hmm. It's pretty profound. Commute time is a greater indicator than test scores, than crime, even more than whether your household has one or two parents. And so as we get into this conversation, I appreciate you all for being here. I think it's important to keep in mind how profoundly important transportation is to everyone, particularly underserved communities. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anita Cozart. I work at PolicyLink, which is a national action and research institute that advances racial and economic equity, and that's all about just and fair inclusion into a society in which everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And so, of course, being here as part of the CBC week, and particularly this session around transportation equity is so very important for, and PolicyLink has gotten into transportation for all of the reasons that Malcolm just talked about, because it's an organization that's actually headquartered in Oakland, California, just across the bay from San Francisco. And so all of the trends that Malcolm talked about in the Mission District are characteristic of West Oakland, and really motivated the beginning of PolicyLink to do this work, and then started to expand into a more national organization and have an office here in Washington, D.C., where I'm proud to work. And I've been with PolicyLink for about 6 years. And around the time that I started, we initiated the Transportation Equity Caucus. And we did that because we recognized a lot of the trends that Deputy Secretary Mendez talked about, and we knew people who were working in communities and leading in communities where transportation was a barrier to opportunity instead of being a bridge to opportunity. And for African Americans, that's a significant issue. If you think about it, 1 out of 10 American households does not have access to a vehicle. In African American households, that's 1 out of 5. And when you think about it, I was reading something just earlier, and it actually came out of Chicago, where there was a researcher there who looked at low-wage Black women workers, and their commute times were 80 minutes longer than the commute times of white women at the same low wages. And so this is the kind of thing where we know there need to be policy interventions to really turn this around and make sure everyone has access to opportunity. So we formed the Transportation Equity Caucus as a group of 120 national, state, and local organizations that are really looking at how federal transportation policy, if we can unlock some of the levers in there and do some policy reforms at the federal level, we can really pour resources into communities that help to bridge some of those gaps and provide a more equitable transportation system. And I'm happy in further rounds to talk a little bit about some of the policy changes related to local hire, related to the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, integrated planning, and community involvement that can really, are ones that you all should really engage in order that we can create a more equitable set of communities around the nation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My name is Robert Bullard. I'm an environmental sociologist, and I told people that I do not do dead white man sociology. I do what's scientifically called kick-ass sociology. I am most recently the former dean of the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. I have been dean at that university for 5 years, and 5 years are long enough to be dean of anything. I'm a distinguished professor of urban planning and environmental policy at TSU. For the last 40 years, I've worked on issues related to housing, transportation, energy, health, land use, climate change, disaster response, industrial facility siting. I've written 18 books, but it's just one book, but don't tell anybody. The central theme of all of that, all those books, fairness, justice, equity. If you put housing and put justice after it, it's housing justice. If you put environment and put justice after it, it's environmental justice. If you put transportation, justice. So the work that I do and work in collaboration with colleagues around the country doing policy and working with community engagement of communities that have been left on the side of the road because of policies. And I, like our moderator, grew up in a very segregated southern United States. And I think the fact that roads were built and then as they were paved, they stopped. As transportation systems somehow did not serve, we paid taxes, but we didn't get services. What I have tried to do is to kind of like model my research and my policy work and my teaching and my scholarship after W.E.B. Du Bois, who founded the sociology department at Atlanta University, and that's where I got my master's degree. So policy, research, mentoring, developing strategies for change, that's how I have, that's how I see myself, and I'm really proud to have been to a lot of these annual meetings and to see a lot of young people and young faces. That gives me hope. When we're dealing with transportation justice and opportunity, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. As a matter of fact, it's a race that doesn't exist. It's a marathon relay. You run your 26 miles and you hand it off to the next generation. I think that's what we have to do to these millennials, and stay with them in terms of their opportunities to mentor, to engage, to form partnerships, collaboration. That's how I think we can be much stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, you've been introduced to our distinguished panel. Now, I am going to give the panel the charge for today. And what I would like for us to do at the end of the day, what I want the audience to know is what are the 5 most important issues facing the Black community with regards to transportation equity. Then I want the audience to know what they will need to do when they leave here, what they need to do in 6 months, what they'll need to do in a year, and then what they will need to do in the next 5 years. Now, I'm going to start this off by asking you guys some questions. I will give one question to the panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to you all. But when we leave here today, let us have a plan where we have identified the 5 most important things that we feel for transportation equity. And then we got to have a plan for ourselves to go out and to make it happen. Because it's not going to just happen by just sitting in this room, listening to this panel, and then packing up and going out. You have got to have a charge, and you have got to be responsible. Everybody in here will have a plan, a personal plan. Now, do I get agreement on that one? No one's saying anything. All right, let's have a little church or something. Help me out.
Yes.
And I am going to start off with Dr. Bullock. How are transportation inequity and environmental justice linked? Tell us how those 2 things are linked, sir.
Well, I think we have to understand that the issue of transportation and civil rights date back more than 120 years. Plessy v. Ferguson was about transportation, was about equity, was about justice, was about fairness, was about racism. And if we look at the impact of transportation, it touches everything. And if you don't have access to transportation, and if you don't have access to mobility, it can cut you off from all kinds of opportunity, from health access to economic and jobs, and from other kinds of opportunity. I wrote 2 books that dealt with transportation specifically. 1997 book called Just Transportation, Dismantling Race and Class Barriers to Mobility. And I followed that book up with a book in 2004 called Highway Robbery, Transportation Racism and New Routes to Equity. And what we found in those books, and what we found even more recently in articles and publications, is that all transportation is not created equal. All state DOTs are not created equal. There are some that are more equal than others. And if you're smart, if you follow the money, you can tell who's important and who's not. Right now we have the bulk of the money for transportation dollars goes to highways and roads. If you look at in terms of African Americans are least likely to own a car. We're more likely to live in cities where transportation-induced pollution creates non-attainment. We breathe other people's air, we get asthma. African Americans are more likely to suffer from asthma, die, and be hospitalized from asthma 3 to 4 times than whites. So when we talk about transportation equity, it's more than getting a ride to work. It's also about making sure that our health is not impaired disproportionately because we're living in cities where the pollution is creating lots of health problems. Asthma is the #1 reason why children are sent to the hospital in the emergency room, not gunshot wounds, not drive-by shooting, asthma. And so when we talk about transportation, we have to link it to health, economics, we have to link it to in terms of opportunity, we have to, in terms of sustainability. So when we talk about moving away from polluting vehicles, and whether it's our garbage trucks, school buses, whether it's those diesel trucks that are running to these ports, or whether it's automobiles, we have to put justice at the front. We also have to make sure that as we move to this clean, green transportation system and clean energy, we don't get left behind with the dirty stuff. And you can see when you look at the research, more affluent communities are most likely to get the the best stuff first. Now, this ain't rocket science. This is what history has taught us. We have to get in line. And so what we have to do is to make sure that we follow the money and have the equity analysis in our MPOs as well as in our state DOTs, and look at how the money flows to the states and make sure it flows in a way that is equitable, and that there are legacy issues that must be addressed, because we know there's some things that have not been taken care of from the 20s all the way up until now. And ultimately, I think the environmental justice framework, the transportation equity framework, and the civil rights social justice framework must be overlaid in all of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anita, how can urban planning eliminate or exacerbate transportation equity?
So I have a confession.
Uh-oh.
I have a background in urban planning. I didn't put that in my intro, but I do.
And that's why that question, that was not a confession. That's why you got that question.
So I do have a background in urban planning, and I'm proud of that background. You know, certainly the field of urban planning, like many other professional fields, has its good sides and has its bad sides, has its successes and has its mistakes, right? And so you've heard from a number of people talking about their own personal stories around particularly how poor transportation decisions have really split up communities. And I would add one dimension to that. Actually, I'd add 2 points. One dimension that's important to think about is the loss of wealth that happened when communities were split up. The business corridors along those communities were split up as well. And this is something that occurred certainly in the 50s and 60s with the significant investment around the country in highway construction, and it is something that continues to be a challenge as we think about major transit line construction. And so one example to reference is from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. And a proposed light rail line there. One of the reasons that initially as that proposal came through, a number of people of color led organizations in the area pushed back against the proposal was because it proposed not to travel through and provide stops in communities of color. The other piece was remembering the fact that through that same community, the Rondo community, the highway, a highway had been put through and took out not only the residences, but the businesses that were there as well. And so this same proposal of having transit this time, even though there were many people who didn't own vehicles and would benefit from transit, the scars of that highway going through and the wealth that was stripped from the communities was made plain. And so one of the proposals that came forward by philanthropic leaders and regional leaders there was to really ensure that there were resources for the local businesses to figure out how they would be able to stay in the community through the construction of that light rail line, so that eventually they could support it and see benefits from having transit along where their business was, as long as they were able and prepared to stay. I think that is an example of the importance of many sectors coming together: philanthropy, local businesses, local government, actually working in concert together along with the private sector, and really understanding, okay, well, what are the needs of some of the most vulnerable people in the communities, and how can we plan and put strategies in place to make sure that everyone benefits and those who are most vulnerable don't get left behind. That was one of the aims as part of the Federal Sustainable Communities Initiative, where regional planning entities got resources to do some long-term planning. One of the conditions of receiving those resources was to have on board sets of community-based organizations who could inform the plan, help shape the priorities for what the future investment would be. So that's kind of the model of the eliminating some of those barriers as opposed to the exacerbating the barriers. And I would just say, as I was getting ready for this, I was looking back. Secretary Fox had done a interview on the Diane Rehm show on National Public Radio, and what came out of that were these really incredible stories that people told from Birmingham, from all kinds of places around the U.S. where they took pictures of what they saw in terms of poor planning decisions. And they talked about their personal stories of what it meant to their families, what it meant to their neighborhoods, and talked about their hope for that to never happen again. So Google Diane Rehm and transportation, and you'll be able to see some of those stories. It shows a map, and it has stories from all over the country, so I encourage you to take a look at that.
Thank you. Now, how many of you in the audience have your neighborhoods have been disrupted by something in transportation? Have any of you experienced that? Let me ask this young lady right there. Tell me about it.
I'm sorry. You want me to repeat that? And then
They were not ready for my
Okay.
my question.
and here in DC, I live in Brentwood, and the expansion of the Red Line and everything that's moving towards Hyattsville is slowly changing my neighborhood every single day. So maybe it's just me.
No, but see, the reason I wanted to ask, because this is something that impacts all of us. When I told you about my story, I never really thought about it because it happened when I was a child. So I never really thought about it, but as I grew older and I started looking, then it became very important to me. So, but it's something that's happening to all of us. That's why I said when we leave, everybody's got a plan. Everybody will have a plan, their own personal plan. What can a group, or I don't know, I'm not going to say a group, but what can we do personally to change this? Dr. Bullard, tell me what we could do.
I think when we look at the issues that have been brought out, I think we have to look at it as a collective strategy, and in many cases, challenge the way that funds are being spent and how they're being spent. You know, we have the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and then oftentimes monies come down and they spend the money, and it's not done in a way that's non-discriminatory. I think we have to let people understand that they have a right to access to transportation. See it as a right, not a privilege. And particularly when we're talking about public dollars being spent to redevelop, to redesign, to refurbish and revitalize. And we have to make sure that low income, middle income, and affluent folks understand that this is something that will benefit all of us, because transportation is the biggest barrier to a job, and if people are not working, there are going to be consequences for that. And so I think to see it as a societal issue that we all must come together with, and there's no substitute for organizing, and it won't just happen just because somebody wills it to happen. We have to come together and organize.
How many of you in the audience attend your MPO meetings?
Maybe explain what the MPO is. That's a big question.
Okay, all right. And your planning organization, it is a group, is it the group in your city? Sometimes it's regional, sometimes it's city by city, but it's your metropolitan planning organization. And those are the ones who come up with the plans for your area. They're also the ones who decide what transportation projects that are done. I would advise all of you to look into your MPO. Yes, go.
So one of the other things that MPOs are asked to do now and be a part of now, and this is per a rule coming forward from the Department of Housing and Urban Development around fair housing. They're asked to be engaged in that process because in many ways they're the ones who are talking about what Dr. Bullard was talking about. Do you have transportation access to a job, to health care, to affordable housing? all of those things. They're the holders of a lot of that information and a lot of that decision-making. And so this rule, which is intended to overturn and eliminate some of the discrimination, particularly that communities of color have faced in terms of getting access to housing in communities in their region, one of the outcomes of that is that each region has to come up with a proactive, affirmative plan. Deputy Secretary Johnson has talked about how we all need to have a plan coming out of this session. Well, these regions have to have a long-term plan for how they are going to remedy discrimination that's happened in the past and avoid it going forward and open up opportunities for access to, in addition to jobs and housing, to parks and green space and good schools and all those kinds of things that people need to thrive. And that's something that the MPOs are going to be involved with as well.
Yes, sir.
Can I make a quick point? The fact that African Americans are very urban, we live in metropolitan areas. There is no national urban policy right now, officially. So transportation is the largest segment of federal dollars that come into our urban areas. And by default, when transportation plans are being developed in these urban metropolitan areas, that's the urban policy. If we're not in those rooms and at that table in there trying to shape and comment on and trying to develop and force those MPOs, those planners talking about housing, land use, watersheds, airsheds, I mean, if we're not in there, they're not gonna be looking out for us. We have to look out for us. And so we have to be active and have organizations that are resourced to do this stuff. That's the plan that we have to make sure that it gets pushed down to the neighborhood, community, to the city, to the county, and then the regional level in terms of collectives of counties. If we don't have that, we're still gonna be left beside the road, looking, waiting, watching. That's where we are right now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir.
And also in that, if you can do the 2-year-old explanation and say, how do we just get on these MPOs? You can't just get on it.
It's not, you don't always have to be on it, but you have to attend the meetings. You have to.
I'll talk some about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll toss that one to you. But I had one. I'm gonna go to Stephanie. She'll handle that one for her. But let me ask this one question: how many of you live in the D.C. area, D.C. Maryland area? Are you familiar with 66? And 66 outside and 66 inside the Beltway? How many of you attended a meeting? We did. I don't know how many outreach meetings we did. Now you live here and you didn't go to an outreach meeting. I don't want not one of you to send me a letter and complain about the tolls. Not one of you. Because there were outreach, I know we did 50 plus outreach meetings. But those are the things that you have to attend so you can know what's going on and have some input. Now I'm going to move on to Stephanie. I don't want to talk too much. All right. What are some long-term goals that the Department of Transportation hopes to achieve with the Ladders of Opportunity initiatives? And this is for you, Stephanie.
Okay, I could talk about that for about 2 or 3 days, but I won't.
I want you to talk about that, and then I also want you to talk about the MPS.
Okay.
Okay?
Well, it all ties in together.
Okay.
Secretary Fox has, as I said, has set some very ambitious goals for us, and we've achieved so many of them. We're really proud of the work that we've done in making, as I said, opportunity and equity a critical, integral part of what we've done, and doing it in a way that we hope will sustain it at all levels of the department, because so much, as you know, in government is driven not by the political appointees, but by the career folks. And so we have worked really hard to make sure that all of our career team understands where we're coming from, understands these issues, and has bought into it. And I think we've been very successful there. And one reason I think we have been is because they deal with these issues too on a personal basis. They use transportation. They have to get to work. They have neighbors and friends. They live in neighborhoods where they've seen They've seen these changes. They've seen the effect of the bad decisions. And it's interesting, a lot of people have been talking today about what's happened in many of our neighborhoods and how transportation infrastructure decisions have impacted the communities. And one of the things I think that is very interesting is that you can go into just about any community in this country and assess and figure out the racial, economic, and social demographics just by looking at the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that tells a story right there. But just as many of us sort of seem a little surprised when we hear, we often think yes, we kind of know something like that happened in our neighborhood, but we don't realize how widespread it is. I think one of the real contributions that Secretary Fox has made to this country is that he has talked about this. He has called it out. He's named it. He has acknowledged that this has happened. He has been doing, he has a fantastic presentation, you can find it online, where he just lays out how transportation infrastructure across the decisions across the country have impacted communities, and he gives facts and figures. He talks about Robert Moses in New York and how a lot of these decisions were made across the country, and then he takes it down to his own neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina, and how his neighborhood was cut off and how he was cut off from opportunity. He couldn't get very easily to the other side of town, and Anita, you mentioned the problem with the loss of wealth in many of these communities because of the loss of businesses, and you're absolutely right. And additional loss of wealth was in homes. Minority communities had their homes taken away. Often they were bought out at far below market value. Houses that in certain areas that ended up, of course, appreciating later, and they moved out. They were pushed out. One of the stories that we point out is there was a situation related to the St. Louis airport, and many people moved out. It was Kinloch, Missouri. And it was a thriving Black community, and many people ended up moving out of that community, and you know where some of them ended up? In Ferguson. And so some of the racial and social and economic demographics that we see in Ferguson were partly the result of that kind of displacement. So it's had all sorts of tremendous ripple effect. So at the department, we think it's very important that we acknowledge this and we recognize it. But one thing that's really important to do, and this is something I encourage everyone to do in dealing with anyone, if you're working with planners, your metropolitan planning organization, or your cities, or your state DOTs, is to also understand in communicating with them that a lot of the people there didn't make these decisions. And so there's a defensiveness that they often have because they feel like they're being blamed or they're being accused of being bigots or being racist or being unfair to people. And a lot of times they're just trying to get the job done. They're just trying to, planners and engineers aren't really thinking about the people that are involved. Like you were saying that, like you're getting from point A to point B without really looking at who is in between point A and point B. But that's not really normally their job. They're trying to figure out how to get something through very efficiently. So a lot of our responsibility is to help them look at it in a different way and understand the impacts that it has on people. But it also helped them understand that they don't have to be actively trying to hurt people. That part of the whole point of institutional discrimination is that it can be perpetuated by well-meaning people just by not changing course, if they're continuing to do things the way they're doing. And that's something we've been stressing at the department. So there's this dual thing we're doing. On the one hand, we are changing, we know we have to change the culture, but we also are putting tools in place that make it easier to change things. So for example, we have stepped up our Title VI enforcement. We're totally sharpening our Title VI tools. Secretary Fox has really read everybody the Riot Act at the department and said, I expect you, he said, I know we have this dual role at the department. We have a stewardship role in working with state DOTs and other stakeholders to get projects moving, move them efficiently, get them done. But we also have an oversight responsibility. And we are, in many instances, the last resort, the only entity that's really looking out for the folks folks on the ground who are impacted by these projects. So it is our job to protect them, and he has told us in no uncertain terms, quoting John Lewis, sometimes I need you to get in the way. And he has been very firm about that and said, don't worry about getting in the way. And so we have, as I said, really stepped up our Title VI enforcement with his encouragement. For example, in Maryland, we are in the middle of a Title VI investigation on the cancellation of the Red Line. We had a very good resolution to a Title VI complaint in Texas, in Corpus Christi, Texas, relating to the relocation of a highway bridge. We went into Alabama we didn't even get a complaint. It was something that we heard about, we found out about it, and we went in on our own and launched an investigation into the closure and reduction of services in DMVs, the motor vehicles driver's license offices. So we're in the middle of that investigation now. So it's really important that we recognize we have a lot of power. We have a lot of power within government, and we also have a lot of power as a community. But as folks are saying here, we have to exercise that, and we have to get in the door, and sometimes we have to get in the way. But getting in the door and making sure we're sitting at the table is, in many instances, a lot of times our responsibility. And we can't always wait to hear about it, because one of the reasons the MPO process is so important, and it's not real sexy, and it's, the meetings, like, they're
Watching paint dry.
Exactly. But that's where so much of the planning takes place, that by the time it rolls out and you go to your city council meeting and hear about it, it's done. A lot of the decisions and alternatives are selected, and it's not that they're necessarily trying to keep it from folks, but this is where it's happening. So we are stepping up our community engagement activity. That we know that community involvement, community engagement are critical. So we are, as part of our Title VI enforcement, we are updating our Title VI order, which has not been updated since the 1970s, by the way. And part of that is we are folding in much more robust community engagement requirements, so that people know about the meetings and that they know where they are. They're hearing about them, and they're also finding out about the meetings, and the meetings are being conducted in a culturally appropriate way, so that people's voices can be heard. I'll just give you an example. We recently had the Every Place Counts Design Challenge, which we went into 4 communities around the country to help them envision and create participate in the designing of solutions to infrastructure problems in their community. One of the places we went was Philadelphia, and the project with the work was being done in Chinatown. And one of the things we found out was that many of the residents there, just culturally, were not comfortable challenging authority outright in meetings. And so that when they had big meetings and big town halls, they often didn't question what was happening. And so they found that much smaller meetings were more effective, small groups. And so it's things like that. It's important for us to have a sense of how to make sure people's voices are heard. But it's really, really critical that we get people in the door early, and as part of the planning process early, because we also find that it ends up working out better for everyone. And so I'll just say, I know I'm going over, but I'll just say real quick, we have just launched the Every Place Counts Leadership Academy that is set up just to do that, to get to increase community involvement, to help average people better understand the mysteries of the transportation planning process. And we put something on every chair, because we're doing a call for nominations for folks to come to the academy, to the launch of the academy. We're asking you to nominate someone, or nominate yourself, and come to DC on October 5th to participate in the beginning of this academy. But we're putting together a fantastic toolkit with tools and information. It will be online. There'll be so much great information to help empower communities. So, and I of course see the distinguished former Secretary of Transportation, Rodney Slater, has joined us. And so that just makes me just have to stop and
Mr. Secretary, you know we will always stop for you.
Yes. I'm sorry? Well, the MPOs are, the MPOs are appointed, but I urge you to find out who your MPO is, like, what body your MPO is, and then start attending the meetings. But they are appointed positions. Usually they're representative, like county officials, city officials, often elected officials or planners. But the first thing to do is to find out who your MPO is, and start to get involved in the process there. Okay.
And after the session, let's you and I have a conversation. I can kind of point you in the right direction. I'd be more than glad to do that.
Where are you from?
North Carolina, where there's been a whole lot of transportation.
Okay, where in North Carolina?
Richmond County, co-traffic.
Okay.
I'm in the AMC, so we're studying local issues.
Okay. Okay. Hello, sir.
Okay, I just got some further instructions, guys. Welcome, sir. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
As everyone knows, you're the former Secretary of Transportation. You are the former Administrator of FHWA. And you serve on the Transurban Board because you're one of our prime contractors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very glad to have you here, sir.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
What we did earlier is we allowed everyone to say a few things about themselves, gave you 3 minutes. But what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I have 2 more questions to ask, and then I'm going to save you for the last, if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Tyra, how do metropolitan planning organizations incorporate equity into their transportation plans, and how effective are they in implementing those considerations when transportation projects are built?
Thank you, Grinley. Well, many of my colleagues on the panel here have already talked about the MPOs and the roles that they have in the communities when it comes to transportation planning. But I'm going to speak directly about DDOT and kind of what we've done in this region, in this area, in terms of our long-range transportation planning. The district, DDOT serves a higher percentage of low-income, non-white, mobility-challenged residents. And so the challenges for us are great, and we understand the equity issues that are before us. And so one of the things that DDOT has done that I think is very innovative and creative, and I think more MPOs really need to take heed, is we talked about public meetings. Instead of having the traditional public meetings at a set date and a set time, what DDOT has done, and we've done pop-up meetings. So if we're doing a bus study, we'll just show up at a bus stop that has high user rates, and we'll conduct the meeting there. And we found that we've gotten a lot more participation. We've gotten a lot more comments. People feel more comfortable sharing the information in that arena rather than the traditional public meeting. And those are some of the innovative things that we've done in terms of the long-range transportation planning. But equity is at the forefront of everything that is done at DDOT. To make sure that we're looking at our Title VI populations before we plan any transportation initiatives in particular areas. One of the biggest issues I will speak to real quickly is the east-west divide in this region. The most recent study that was conducted by the MPO here found that there's a huge increase in jobs in the western part of the region, in the Tysons Corner area. But obviously our low-income, non-white populations are in the eastern part of the region. And so then you have the issue of those who don't have access to vehicles. How do they get to those higher paying jobs? How do they get access to those opportunities? And so land use becomes a big issue as well, because while housing that's available to low-income populations is on the eastern side, the jobs is on the western side of the region. So that's one of the biggest concerns that's in front of the MPO right now that we're trying to tackle as we talk about equity and inclusion.
Thank you, thank you. Now, Malcolm, I saved your question for last because you are the future. You're talking about the technology. So what are some current success and future challenges regarding the impact of rideshare and other technologies in the equity conversation? Tell us about the future.
It's a great question, and I think Stephanie mentioned just before the sort of unintended consequences of the people who are the engineers and the folks who are designing and planning these things. And I think unintended consequences can often be negative, but in the case of Uber, unintended consequences have been remarkably positive, because I just want to put it out there. Let's not pretend that Uber started to serve underserved communities. Uber did not start because Uber wanted to, give transportation equity to populations that have traditionally not received it. Uber started because there were two guys in San Francisco who couldn't get a cab, and they had a really great idea and a smartphone. But one of the unintended consequences of what they realized with Uber was that there is an amazing appetite for transportation, and transportation as an additional sort of a lever in the existing transportation ecosystem. And so when I think about one of the most significant successes that Uber has had, it's been how we've been able to sort of integrate into all of the transportation options that already exist. And so the American Public Transportation Association did a survey earlier this year, and it actually found that most of the people who use Uber are actually people who already use public transportation. So folks who use Uber are people who are already using buses, will continue to use buses, people who already use the metro or some equivalent rail service, and will continue to use rail service, because in a lot of instances, Uber really serves as sort of first mile, last mile alternative to whatever transportation would get you to or from the end of a rail line or a bus line or whatever the case is. And I think that's really important, because a lot of, I think, false notions exist about kind of what Uber is really tapping into and what industries Uber is really sort of making its mark in. And I think if you were to really look long term, what is Uber really competing with? Well, it's individual car ownership. It's not public transportation. I think in truth, it's really a complement and a supplement to public transportation. But individual car ownership is the kind of thing that, if you think about the scaled model of Uber, really isn't going to exist in as robust of a way as it has up to this point. You can imagine what the sort of externalities of that are. Dr. Bullard talked about the environmental impact. We're doing a study with the National Resources Defense Council that's actually going to quantify the decrease in emissions and pollution as a result of ride-sharing services. If you look at something like DUIs, in virtually every city where we enter, there's a significant drop in the number of drunk driving incidents as a result of ride-sharing. And if you look at the most prominent times when people use Uber, it's between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. on Friday and Saturday. You know what people are doing at between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. on Friday and Saturday. And furthermore, it's the kind of time when public transportation might not be operating, or public transportation might not be operating in a robust way. You think about the number of car ownership, the number of car owners decreasing, what impact that has on traffic fatalities. There's something like 1.3 million people who die in traffic incidents every year. It's something like 30,000 in the United States. 90% of those are the result of human error. If you can take fewer cars, if you can put fewer cars on the road, take people out of this sort of headspace where they're trying to get to their job and thinking about what they have to do at home, and having them focus on just taking the ride, I think you can actually have a significant impact on traffic fatalities, which is pretty profound. But I kind of want to go back to that idea of Uber as a supplement to public transportation, because there's some really interesting stats that I think kind of bear out the degree to which that's already the case. And so in DC, for example, 60% of Uber rides begin or end within a quarter mile of a metro station. So people are taking metro part of the way, taking Uber to end the ride, or vice versa, taking metro part of the way and taking Uber to get them to that rest of the way they need to get to their home or their job. In Ward 7 and Ward 8 here in DC, the number of Uber rides in the span of a year increased by 700%. And with the advent of things like Uber Pool, you really begin to drive down the price. You really begin to have an alternative or a supplement or a complement to public transportation. And we've really seen that in DC. So in the last 6 to 9 months, those of you who live here have seen that there's the Safe Track DC Metro Maintenance Project that's been going on. That's displaced in many instances thousands of people on a daily basis when large portions of metro lines are shut down, especially when those lines are east of the river, especially when those lines are in southeast DC, especially when those lines are in the very parts of the city where people oftentimes don't have other alternatives. So it's created obviously a really unique business opportunity for us, but it's also created a huge challenge because we can't afford to have thousands of people who are usually not on the platform jumping on the platform in the course of a day. And so what we've done is we've pushed people to pool very aggressively. We've subsidized the rides such that now in DC you can get, in most parts of the city, an Uber pool during rush hour for $3. If you want to go from Benning Road to Georgetown, it costs you $5. That's very competitive with, that's a very reasonable way to get around, even if you don't have access to Metro, even if you don't have access to the public transportation opportunities that a lot of other folks do. So I think that's a really important point. So, you know, we could talk forever about successes. I think it's sort of, you know, it's important to actually acknowledge the part of the question that mentions the challenges as well. So Uber is not, there's still some really significant barriers of entry. For example, you need a smartphone to use Uber. Everyone doesn't have a smartphone. That's not something that we're necessarily going to be able to tackle today or tomorrow. We do have a product called Uber Central, which allows for the sort of dispatching of rides on behalf of other people. Right now it still requires a smartphone, but you can imagine a future endeavor in which Central is able to be dispatched on behalf of people even who don't have smartphones. You can imagine it, for example, at a hospital when patients are leaving and they're trying to get home from their treatment. You know, everyone doesn't necessarily have access to banking. The nature of Uber right now is that you need a credit card or some other banking alternative to ride, whether that's, you know, Google Wallet, PayPal, some other access to a checking account. But one of the interesting things that we are doing is in a number of other countries, predominantly countries in Africa as well as parts of Southeast Asia and India, is we're rolling out a cash option. And so banking is not especially prevalent in many parts of the world, and certainly not prevalent in many parts of communities in the United States as well. And so there are obviously some challenges there. Drivers don't like cash because it makes them targets for robberies, one of the great benefits over taxi if you're driving with Uber. And you have to make change, you have to make sure that you have the right amount. It makes the sort of seamless exit from the vehicle not quite as seamless. But we've seen some really great adoption around the world when we introduce cash. And so cash is something that in the near future we're going to be piloting in a number of cities around the US, specifically cities where we've seen a disproportionately low adoption of banking and where there are underserved areas that would really benefit from it. But I think when you talk about challenges, the greatest challenges that we face are actually from the sort of driver side, because there's this sort of perfect supply and demand balance that you have to strike when you're Uber to make sure that there's the right number of people to give rides to the people who want rides. And it actually very much ties into this idea of equity. When we see regulations in certain states and localities that are actually undermining the ability of people to drive for the platform. And some of these regulations actually disproportionately impact our community. So for example, in Austin, Texas, I'm sure a lot of folks saw that we left earlier this year because of regulations that were getting the plug. I'll be very brief. Regulations that were disproportionately impacting the black community. So they wanted us to institute for our background check process something called fingerprinting, which uses an FBI database that is notoriously incomplete. This FBI database has as many as half of the records in it without final disposition. So what does that mean? If you've been arrested for a crime, not convicted, not charged, you will get flagged and you won't be able to drive for Uber. The number of people who are arrested for crimes, not convicted, not charged, are disproportionately black and brown. These regulations are in place not necessarily to make sure that they ensure safety, but instead to undermine the ability of African Americans and Latinos to get onto the platform. So we actually made some changes in California earlier this year where we aligned our driver screening process with a proposition that passed statewide called Proposition 47, reclassified a number of felonies as misdemeanors such that people who are looking for a second chance and who in no way jeopardize safety, they have the exact same ratings on the platform as the national average, can get onto the platform, and we can make sure that we're providing the right supply of drivers so that we can give these rides. Because if we don't have people who can drive the cars, we have no way of getting these people around in the first place. And especially if those regulations are targeting African Americans and Latinos, it's especially important to make sure that they're getting the opportunity to drive and to drive around our community so we have access to the opportunities that we deserve.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, your question, I'm going to give you a question, and before you answer your question, I'd like for you to tell us a little something about yourself, please, sir.
Okay.
Your question is, what can a group or a community legally do if they feel a transportation project is infringing in their neighborhood unfairly or is affecting people in a negative way?
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I'm very, very pleased to be here and to be a part of this panel. I have probably participated in the CBC transportation activities for, oh my, many, many years. Let's just leave it at that. Not only when I was so honored to be the secretary, but even after that. I was pleased this morning to actually spend some time with Secretary LaHood, and I know he's been here on many occasions as well. And I was just with Secretary Fox in Little Rock for the centennial anniversary of the National Park Service, and I know that he has spent some very, very special times with you. And then Deputy Secretary Mendez and I know each other quite well from Federal Highway days, as well as the wonderful job that he's now doing in the office of the Secretary. So it's a pleasure to be here and to have a few moments with you. Many of you know that I'm from Arkansas. And I came to get into this arena of transportation as I was traveling with our then governor, trying to get him reelected many, many years ago, really in 1982. I was a young lad at the time. He was as well. But so many people were talking about the importance of transportation. And Dr. Johnson, you would, or Deputy Secretary Johnson, you would know that that has happened as you've been in earshot with Governor McAuliffe, and
Oh, yeah.
and so the question then becomes, how do you get involved in something like that? And for me, that happened in 1987 when I was appointed to the Arkansas Highway and Transportation Commission. I was the first African American to serve on that commission, and I remember as a staffer actually being asked for names of individuals to be considered for appointment. My response to the chief of staff then was, there's no position. She then informed me, there's no position today, but the governor would like your best recommendations tomorrow. So when I gave them to him, he then, through a few questions with me, let it become clear that he actually wanted to appoint me to the position. And for me, most of the names that I had offered, it was a diverse list for sure, but I must admit that most of the individuals were much older. I mean, much, much older, probably as old as I am now, because that was pretty much the tradition at the time. But this was an opportunity for me to really get involved in an area that means a lot to all of us. And transportation, as you've heard from your speakers, it just touches our lives in many, many ways, and that's why it's important to know how you can impact the system if it's not working as you would desire. First of all, with this panel, now you have names in some of the foremost quarters of those who play this role, whether it's at the state level, the local level, within the office of the secretary, leaders of industry, captains of industry, those who are involved in the work of the community with Policy Link, and those involved in academia with Dr. Bullard. And so with this panel alone, you have been introduced to people who, if you were to call, and you remind them, well, I remember seeing you when you were on stage at the CBC conference, and I've got this issue, I've got this concern. And so it can be raised at all of these levels. I'll give you a perfect example. I remember when I was federal highway administrator, and the new transportation bill had just come into existence, and we hit the road because we wanted to educate people across America about the details of the document. And I remember traveling from Buffalo, New York to Laredo, Texas, 13 days, 13 states, 3,500 miles. And we were stopping all along the way for meetings like this, and it was designed to educate people. And when we got to Memphis, the mayor of Memphis said to me, in the presence of the DOT secretary and others who were with us, he said, I've been asked to head up this metropolitan planning organization. And he said, I don't have time for that, but I would like for you to tell me how I can impact transportation decision-making. I said, Mr. Mayor, that's how you do it. I said, this is a new provision of the law that requires state officials to really engage local officials in the planning process. And you have been asked to serve as the chair? I said, that's the best time that you can spend on that job. And so that's just an example of how people can become involved and how they can make a difference. I'll give you one other example that makes the case from the vantage point of the community itself. I remember being in Austin, Texas at the Johnson School, and we were celebrating the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Department of Transportation. And I had assembled as secretary, and you can do this as secretary, quite an array of panelists, much like these individuals here. But you know, it was J.B. Hunt from J.B. Hunt Trucking, and you just go across the line of it. And the governor had welcomed us, and lo and behold, we got there, and there was a presence on the part of the group, ACT UP. And they were very much involved in the work of ensuring that people who have disabilities have access to transportation. And by the way, you think about a disability and you think about an opportunity for an Uber. You did a great job just laying out the many, many ways that this company is revolutionizing transportation. But for me, it was not about that at that point. It was about a civil rights question. And I had given a speech about the importance of transportation in the civil rights arena, whether it was Plessy and Homer Plessy trying to ride any place on a train, or Mrs. Park trying to ride any place on a bus. I mean, or the trip from Selma to Montgomery on US Highway 80, or the trip across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You see what the Montgomery bus boycott. You see how all of this relates to transportation. It's all about access. Well, ACT UP was getting fired up because their point was, what about us? And this nation has never lived out and lived up to its commitment to ensure that the disabled would have access. And what does that mean? It means a sidewalk, it means curb cuts, it means lifts for buses. They disrupted that event. That's all I'm saying. And I remember, I was a little, unnerved by it, but I remember just this conversation I'd had with the governor, where he said, the reason I want to appoint you is because I don't want the power and the position to be in some hallowed halls where people have to come to see you. I want someone who has the energy, who has the commitment to what we stand for, who will be willing to go out. And I remember instinctively knowing that I needed to leave that podium, go down into that audience, and to be in that circle, leaving all my CEOs now on the stage. And frankly, they were happy that I was doing that too, because they were having to deal with the blowback, right? They're all on stage. We're all on CNN. We're all on C-SPAN. And I remember having just one of the most, it was excruciating, but one of the most productive experiences of my tenure as secretary. Because at that point, I was able to make a commitment in the presence of those who would not be denied. That's the point I'm making with you, with your concerns. Do not be denied. And I can tell you that at every turn, as we were doing our work, this was always an issue that we were ready to address. And I remember also being able to say to my wife, who was actually the first member of our family in a Clinton cabinet. She was the head of disability determination in Arkansas, and she was probably 30 at the time. I mean, I just say that to say that it can happen at any moment in time when you're touched and you have to be ready. But her whole business was about disability. And I remember having conversations with her about the importance of this work long before I became a member of the Highway Commission, or long before I became secretary. And I'll close with this. I remember that night getting a call from my mother, who had seen me on television.
And she was proud.
And she was proud. She was proud. I mean, that's the thing. And what she recognized was, and this is what I want to close with, if you have power, the best way to elevate that power is to not associate with just the others of power, is to elevate others around the periphery. And in doing so, everybody leaves empowered. And that's what these individuals do in their work on a daily basis. They use those minds that are as wise as serpents and those hearts that are as harmless as doves to take the work that they do forward to the benefit of all society. And that's what makes work a joy and not a job.
Thank you. That was perfect. That was perfect. Perfect timing, sir, because now this crowd is energized and they have questions for us. So who has the mic? Okay, we have a gentleman up front. We're going to do Q&A with the panelists.
Thank you much. I just wanted to say a couple of things. One, on the DOT, DC, I'm a district resident, and also I'm working with the, we used to have a cab commission. We no longer have a cab commission, but it's also a part of the competition from Uber, which I think is great. We now have an office of vehicle for hire, which is much more expansive. But in addition to that, DC also has come up with something that I know you probably know about it, for, and the reason I know is because I have a contract with the cab company in this country, in this city, that handles about 10% of the business of cabs, and there's about 7,000 cabs in DC, so it's about 700 cabs. And what they're doing is they're now actually creating a situation where not just the taxi cab, normal taxi cabs, but we're also going to have the Uber kind of a app where you can order your cab by phone, you can pay by credit card, you can pay by phone, or you can pay by cash. There's also a neighborhood taxi cab service that's being put out, which is going to create sort of like a mini school bus. But a neighborhood person will be hired to run that taxi cab service, and they will then go around and pick up people in the neighborhood and take them at, again, a discounted price as a regular cab, because there's more people on the, it's like a split share ride kind of a situation. So what I'm saying is that I think one of the things Uber has done in DC in particular has created a more competitive feel. It has cut out some of the stuff we used to have, like the background checks and FBI checks that we do still have, but we don't have them as intensive as we have. And we're now able to create a situation where we can hire people in the neighborhood to provide a service in the neighborhood, which also means that we're probably going to have more camaraderie in terms of the taxi cab drivers and the community, and hopefully cut down on some of the things we used to have, like, robberies and other kind of things. So for that sense, I'm really happy that Uber did come to DC. But the question I have, which I'm going to get to now, is that when we look, I had to put that plug in, okay? So the question I have, though, as we look in the future, Doctor, and I think you mentioned some of this, part of what we look at is like, we're looking not just at that, but we're looking at autonomous cars. Uber is not going to be around with drivers. It'll be people with nobody driving. People will own cars that they don't have to drive. There's an infrastructure that has to be built around all that. How can we plan for that kind of future, I guess is the question.
So it's a great question, and it's an especially salient one because this morning in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we actually put the first self-driving cars on the market for people to actually use on the Uber platform. So a select number of riders in Pittsburgh can actually call autonomous vehicles, and a car will pick them up. But the important part is there's still a person in the driver's seat, and there's still going to be a person in the driver's seat in all likelihood for a really, really long time. The idea of scaling the model of autonomous vehicles without human intervention is going to take, I think, a lot longer than people realize for a couple of reasons. So earlier this week, I was actually at a convening at the New America Foundation, and it was actually called The Ethics and Morality of Autonomous Vehicles. And there are some very profound questions around how you program autonomous vehicles to answer and deal with very human realities. So for example, if you program an autonomous vehicle not to break the law, but it has to cross a yellow line to avoid an accident, is that okay? And what if it crosses that yellow line to avoid an accident and it hits another car? Who is at fault? Huge questions around that portion. There are huge questions around the regulatory environment. There are very few laws in very few places that have ever governed whether there can be autonomous vehicles on the road. And so there's going to be a very significant negotiation process with regulators as to how we go about making sure that the environment is right for both safety as well as the innovation behind autonomous vehicles. And I think there's also an element that we have to remember, which is that the technology is so far from being there. And this is coming from someone who has been in one of Google's autonomous vehicles in the years when I worked at Google. I was in a vehicle that could work on the highway, but probably every 5 to 10 minutes, the manual mode had to be enacted because it couldn't get around, say, an accident or a roadblock. Or in Pittsburgh, for example, with the Uber cars, drivers take over probably 2 to 3 times in just a 2-mile area. We can't even go up many hills. We can't deal with inclement weather yet. The technology has a long way to go before it's safe enough for people to actually use without human intervention. And I also think it's worth, comparing to a situation where technology disrupted an industry and it actually ultimately resulted in a better outcome for workers. So, for example, a lot of people were really worried when ATMs were introduced to the banking industry, and tellers thought, well, we're going to lose our jobs because it's going to be done by machine. And to some degree that was the case, but what happened with ATMs was a number of folks could actually open up way more mini banks than they ever could before because ATMs were such a low cost and you only needed a couple of tellers. And so what it has actually meant is far more branches of banks, far more people working in the banks, just perhaps people working in different places. There's going to be a whole maintenance aspect of autonomous vehicles that I think people underplay that's going to be able to employ hundreds of thousands of people, again, if you think about it at scale. And there's going to be a whole host of engineering prowess that needs to go into designing cities to be able to adapt to and fuel autonomous vehicles in a widespread way on the road. So I certainly understand the question, and I certainly think it's a really exciting endeavor that we're undertaking, especially when you take into account the safety impact that it's going to have. But I think we're so far away from it at scale that we're going to have a pretty significant transition period in which people are still going to be employed behind the wheel and in the maintenance and in other facets of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Slater.
I'd just like to add quickly that we are some distance away, but you should know that this administration is really doing a lot on this front. Secretary Fox and Ms. Jones would know this, but Secretary Fox announced his Beyond Traffic report at the Google headquarters. There has been a commitment to invest some $4.5 billion in this area over the next few years. The administration has also accepted the definition of driver to include someone other than, or something other than a human being. And all of these are the building blocks for this kind of effort. So Clearly, I just want to applaud the administration for all the work that it's doing. And you're going to have issues of equity and inclusion. So our chief equity and inclusion officer is already involved in that kind of deliberation, even though it's a long way off. You don't want bringing up our business occurring at the end of the day. You want it at the very beginning.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. And you actually led into exactly what the point I wanted to make is that it's we have a wonderful opportunity, no pun intended, to get in on the ground floor of this, to make sure that opportunity and inclusion are built into the platforms, that they're not afterthoughts, we're not trying to retrofit it at a later point. And so we're not just talking about it, though, which is really important. We need to talk about it. We're working with the different companies. We're making sure that they're aware of that. But we're also putting our money where our mouth is. For example, with our Smart Cities Challenge, we put up $40 million, and Columbus won the challenge. And the key of that is to come up with solutions for smart cities that integrate all of this innovation, all this technology, and integrates opportunity into it. So, for example, we were talking earlier about issues related to people without smartphones or the unbanked, and how do we make sure we're integrating everyone into this? And so Columbus and many of the other cities have come up with some wonderful solutions for that. And I'll tell you, one of the things that was so gratifying was in the process of selecting the cities, we had a very stringent review process. We had review panels, evaluators, then these evaluators and review panels were from across the department at all levels, mostly career people. And I sat in on the meetings. I was part of the panel. And I expected that my role would be to make sure I was leaning in on the opportunity pieces, to make sure that make sure they were thinking about it, because I thought, I'm not sure if they're going to really protect that. So that will be my job. And I actually had to say very little. In these review panels, it was so fantastic listening to career DOT staff nailing it and looking at these proposals and questioning, asking the right questions, and noticing if something didn't really, but what about, they left these people out, or what about, one of the things that was really gratifying to us was hearing people say, well, wait, what about the unbanked? What about the unbanked? They're not thinking about that. You need to go back and figure that out. That's what we're doing. That's what we're making sure that people are thinking about this, that they are also pushing and making these important criteria as we move forward, because we do have an opportunity. This is something that's starting almost from scratch. And we don't often get that opportunity to do it right from the very beginning. And we've seen what happens when we don't do it right. So I commend everybody. You all have been at Uber, and the other companies have worked with us really well and have been very interested in doing this. And we are doing everything we can. But we also need all of you to push that also. So this is a really good, it's an exciting new frontier. And I think we have some really great opportunities to do it right.
One more comment from Anita, and then we're going to have another question out from the audience.
And just briefly, I appreciate Stephanie's comments there, and think that that's the kind of leaning in that we need to do in our local communities. I think the other thing we need to do is kind of step back and think about how this fits in a bigger picture, just thinking about the future of work and what's happening related to the types of jobs that are available, and do they have the kinds of wages and benefits that we need to make sure that we're on a pathway to building wealth for our communities. Ages ago, it was really about having government sector jobs, and we understand that the government sector job investment declined. We understand that that had a pretty disproportionate impact on African Americans. There are plenty of studies around that, and what we need to look at looking forward is making sure that the jobs that are created, and transportation is a sector where you can create jobs that have family supporting wages and benefits. We have to be diligent, and maybe it includes grassroots organizing, it includes going to MPO boards. We have to be diligent about making sure that the quality of those jobs are ones that can support a family. And so as that's the lens through which we should really look at opportunities in the sharing economy, in kind of the future investments that we're making.
Okay, let's get one, we're gonna do a couple of questions, okay? You, sir?
She's
And then
doing the
we'll
right
get
thing,
someone on
holding the
other
mic.
side of the room.
I have two quick questions. I work in the state of Michigan, and one of the things you mentioned, Dr. Bullard, was that some of the tangential issues around transportation. One of the things we see is criminal justice. So in cities that have lack of mass transit, you have a lot of individuals who are called driving dirty. They get stopped, they get warrants, and then now they're in the criminal justice system, and they may just be doing it just to get to work. So I wanted to know if there are any reclamation or remediation initiatives that you've seen around the country that have actually addressed this issue of getting folks to have their warrants reduced and getting them back into the workforce. That's the first question. Second question is that we're at a 10-year mark in Michigan. A lot of infrastructure projects are up. And we have, for example, a bridge initiative to Canada in Detroit. That's a $2 billion infrastructure project. If we let that project today, you can wrap the city with a line of folks who will not qualify for the work that's going to come out of that project, as well as the MBEs that will not necessarily be eligible to handle that kind of workload. And I noticed that in some of the stuff you had information on apprenticing. But apprenticing for a project now, when we know a project's coming up in the future, it's problematic to get job on the job training while the project's being let. I'm not sure if your apprenticing programs are allowing folks to go into projects today for those known projects tomorrow. So if you have any insight on that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
I'm happy to start on the second question. I don't know about programs related to the first question, but on the second question, one thing that's proved very effective is the creation of community workforce agreements, and those are created when the projects are on the drawing table at the MPO level. And so between unions and local community organizing groups working with whether it's the city or the state, and they get together, draw up an agreement around the procurement that they're going to do related to minority and disadvantaged businesses, and they make agreements about the percentages related to that. They make agreements about targeted groups, whether it's formerly incarcerated, whether it's the hard to employ for other reasons, whether it's African Americans, other people of color. They set forth this agreement, and when they're set up ahead of time, because you're exactly right, you can't set it up, you know, right before you're getting ready to bid, because the pipeline of people are not ready. And so the more of these community workforce agreements we do, and the more that we attach them early on in the planning process, the better off people are, and the shorter that line of people who are not able to qualify will be.
Just to deal with the first part of your question, I think the scenario that you described is symptomatic of the Motor City, where they built cars historically, and the fact that Detroit was the only major metropolitan metropolitan region that didn't have a regional transit system. You got Detroit bus system, and you got the county, and then two didn't connect. So the residual of that, or the legacy of that disconnect, means that there's no alternatives to somebody who has tickets and who has warrants and who has whatever, and people will survive. They'll drive dirty, and they'll take the chance of getting caught to get to the job. I think a good example. Well, there's an example of the young man that was walking how many miles and going to work, never missed a day at work. 25. I mean, somebody bought him a car. Yeah. But the idea is that there's no alternative in Detroit in terms of in terms of a transit system that's seamless, that you can get to work. And so the solution is to come up with a real regional transportation system that would allow someone that may have tickets or whatever. The other side effect of that, or the underbelly of having having a record and having served your time and and you may not be able to get to your job because of all kinds of things that has nothing to do with your ability to do the job. And the fact that in some cases, there's a big movement, ban the box going on right now. All these things are related, and I think when we look at the full package of the people who are basically somehow denied access to transportation, and that basically cutting them off from economics, ability to feed their families, etc., and it pushes them in that underground economy, that fallback position, and I think it's more than unfortunate. I think that's unacceptable. And so it means that we have to make sure that we fight for, in your region, there has to be, organizing, mobilization to talk about getting people access to transportation, alternative to driving, so that they can get the jobs. And we know who that hits the hardest. And in Detroit, we're talking mostly African American, other people of color.
Yeah. Ms. Jones?
We're going to take a question of this side. Where's my lady with the mic?
Yeah.
Oh.
Deputy Secretary Johnson, while she's bringing up the mic, can I just make one quick comment there? And it's this. You mentioned that there was an effort to bring transit to Detroit. Actually, that was in the Ford administration, and Secretary Coleman was in office, and more than $1 billion was put forth, and it was turned down. And it was largely because of the issues and the points that were raised. And it did put Detroit in a difficult strait. Now, having said that, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of the 20th century. And now Detroit is marrying itself up with Silicon Valley, with all that's going on as relates to the autonomous vehicle and that sort of thing. So while there are stresses and strains, the opportunity runway is quite extensive. And to the degree we can take advantage of this moment, we can have a ride that will be a great ride for a long time going forward.
Thank you very much. My name is Sylvie Bella, and I'm with the Cameroon American Council. And in terms of inclusion, per U.S. Census, 1 out of 5 Black babies have a foreign-born parent or grandparent. And at the Cameroon American Council, we work with African immigrants. I have 2 questions. One is, as we talk about inclusion in an African American context, and with the fact that there are many African Americans who are of immigrant heritage as well. How do we include immigrants who are part of the African American community in things such as language access, such as eligibility around citizenship? That's the first part. The second part is we're very excited that Secretary Fox took the first trip to Africa of the Department of Transportation, that the Department of Transportation has always thought internationally but never around Africa. But then he came back, and the outreach has not been done in the African immigrant community. We actually have an opportunity on September 29th, which we sent out an invitation, to have someone from your office come out to the African immigrant community and talk about the outreach that you do out in Africa, since it was your first time, as well as the work that you do here around African immigrant Americans. Thank you.
Okay.
Who wants to take that one?
Let me just stab at it a bit. One is, I do think that by extending transportation to communities where you have individuals and homes like the ones you've addressed, that's a part of the role of transportation. So extending into those communities and having your voice as a part of the voices at the table when it comes to transportation planning. I also would like to underscore the important role of the Department of Transportation internationally. And this affords me an opportunity to actually identify one of the individuals who served on my team, and that's Brad Mims, who was very much involved in our effort to reach out to Africa. And I am so pleased that Secretary Fox has continued that effort, and we want it to continue into the next administration. But I can tell you that of the 50 open sky agreements that we signed during that period, 12 were on the Africa continent. And we started the process of setting in place the opportunity for U.S. Airlines to fly direct to the continent of Africa, because at that time, most of the air travel on the continent was controlled by the former colonizing countries. So most people traveling to Africa had to go through Europe and then to Africa. And today I'm pleased that two U.S. airlines, first Delta and then United, actually fly direct to the continent. That's all very, very important. And what it does is it ties the continent through, I'm just saying air, but in other means, it ties it to markets around the world. So I think it's very important for every community to be connected to the transportation grid, because what it does is it gives access to opportunity. We used to say, even when we were promoting welfare to work, that transportation was the two in welfare to work, because jobs were generally in one location and people were living in another. And that goes for educational opportunities, it goes for recreational opportunities, all job opportunities. So transportation is very, very important as a bridge. And I'll just maybe leave it at that.
All right,
Thank you.
Stephanie, then we're going to take another question.
Regarding your invitation, I will touch base with you after the session, and we'll get you somebody there. Okay.
All right, let's take a question in the middle. Have we talked to anyone in the middle yet? And unfortunately, this is probably going to be our last question.
Okay,
I will say this. I think the panel will stay around a little while to answer some additional questions. Will you do that, Pam?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I have a very specific question. My name is Margaret Hewitt, and I'm president of the Construction Green Team, a sustainability consulting firm in Cleveland, Ohio. And we have used the INVEST tool, which is a sustainability rating tool for roadway and bridge construction that the Federal Highway Administration developed in Cleveland. It has very much a community engagement portion to it. And so my question is, can you give, those of you all who are familiar with it, can you give any recommendations on how to use that community engagement portion of that tool, which I'm trying to promote all over the country, but for the communities that we've been talking about? Because of that community engagement piece, in my mind, I see a connection there, but I don't know exactly how I could help develop that, promote that, advance that connection.
I think one thing I would urge you to do is to get involved with our Leadership Academy, and to encourage you and also leaders, and not just current leaders, but future leaders, to get involved and to learn much more about, because a lot of this is very highway focused. The academy covers all of our areas of all of our modes of transportation, but highways is always particularly that touches communities so deeply. And so, and I think what we're finding is we have to listen a lot more, and we have to help people understand. We have to listen to what people are, what they need in their communities, what their aspirations are, what they need in terms of jobs, in terms of getting to work, improving their communities. One of the things Secretary Fox often says is that transportation is not just about getting people to better places, but it's also about making our places better. That infrastructure has so many important roles in our lives that we don't even realize. We don't realize the impact that it has, as the Secretary was saying, as Secretary Slater has said. That you can't get to work, we often say you can't go there if you can't get there. You can't learn there if you can't get there. But I think the more you can help, the average person better understand how transportation affects their lives, and that there are tools available, and that their voices are needed. We do need to hear them. And the more that the decision makers hear from folks, they find it's it's actually very helpful, and it saves time. It actually saves time and money in the long run, because when folks go in a room and they decide what they're going to do, and then they roll it out, and usually at that point the community engagement is for the community to come and tell the planners what they don't like about it, and then try to fix, little pieces, rather than being part of the larger conversation. Then you end up with Title VI complaints. You end up with projects getting slowed down. Things just don't work as well. So I think the communities can be very helpful in the planning process. And what we're trying to do is empower people to know that it's not, that you don't have to have a lot of technical expertise to be a valuable part of the process. And I think the more you can empower people and then use those tools to, and then also let us know what works and what doesn't work with these tools, because we're still, even with the Leadership Academy, we're constantly trying to boil the information down so that, and even in meetings, we find ourselves talking in acronyms and then say, wait, no, that's somebody, most people are not going to understand that. Let's break it down some more so people can really know what we're talking about and know how it affects their lives. So I think there are a lot of different things you can do, but a lot of that is that engagement piece. We really need your help.
Okay, thank you guys. There's never enough time. But I have one comment from Mr. Nachetti.
Thank you. To all your points, Secretary, Dr. Bullard, every panelist up there has had amazing things to say. What I want to add to that is take a lesson from California. Push your regulators, push your congressmen to put disadvantaged communities as a point scoring advantage to get money funded for buses. I grew up on buses in Oakland and Berkeley in the 60s and 70s as part of my fabric of my life. As an adult, I followed them around just for the sake of, see what a bus does for 8 hours. Look at the communities it goes into. Look at the pollution it creates. Yes, it's getting people where they need to go, but at a health risk. And so California, when they put out their funding to help with zero-emission buses, they always have a DAC element, and it could be points. It could be 5 or 10 extra points if you have a strong DAC representation. I've seen some of their stuff come out where it's 100% of the grants will only be funded to projects that have at least some acceptable proportion of DAC. So to the Secretary's point, get in the way. To Dr. Bullard's point, make noise, get involved, go to the MPOs, go to your regulators, go to your legislatures, be loud, and because we do have to end this environmental injustice. We do have to get the sustainable technology into the communities that need it worst. We can't let babies grow up with asthma when there's a solution right in front of our noses, and we're just not doing it. So whether you end up buying a BYD bus or a competitor's bus, I don't care. But I want you to get involved and get the technology where it needs to go and deserves to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're coming to the very end of our program. I am going to introduce a good friend who is now the chair of COMPTO, president of COMPTO, Bradley Mims. Come up, sir. And he's an aviation man, so he's not going to be talking about roads.
Well, I will tell you this. Again, it's a pleasure to see everyone turn out for this particular brain trust. And it's been such a turnout, and it's been such a wonderful topic that with Dr. Ezekiel and Congressman Cummings that we're going to do a part 2 tomorrow. So we're going to focus on transportation as a civil right, and we're going to kind of keep this same discussion moving. And on behalf of Congressman Cummings, State Farm, Dr. Ezekiel, he did a great job. And let's give him a hand for putting this program together. He had to calm me down a couple times. I was getting a little excited over there. But,
I saw you over there. You were doing some hand
I was doing some hand stuff. But want to touch on one issue that was heard universally here. Get out in front. Get out in front of these issues. Deal with the MPOs. You don't have to be a member of the MPO. Show up and be vocal about what you're doing. So as you move forward, just understand that COMTO's here, Conference of Minority Transportation is here. That's what we do. We advocate for minorities in the transportation industry. I have one of my board members here from Missouri who has done a great job in doing yeoman's work to make things right in the state of Missouri. So that's Lester Woods here. I just want to close out by saying, again, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary Slater, in case you guys don't know, he afforded me a bevy of opportunities internationally to let this same issue be known, not only here domestically, but internationally. And so I want to make sure we not only touched Africa, we touched the entire world. We hit every continent in the world when Secretary Slater was Secretary of Transportation. So with that, let me wrap up, and I thank all of you for having us here.
It has been my pleasure to be the moderator for such a distinguished panel. But as I walk off and I give the podium to Dr. Zeki, I have to say one paid political announcement. And you can hook me if you want to. But I encourage every one of you to go out and vote locally for your local elected officials and your state officials. We always come out for president, but it is the locally elected officials who have the most impact on what happens in your life. So I encourage you. Now, I know this presidential election is important because if it didn't turn out the way I don't know what I'm going to do. But I just want to say, guys, you got to get out and vote. And not only you vote, you got to tell 10 other people and get them to tell 10 other people. I know that's old school, but it still works. Yes. It still works. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Dr. Zeki. Thank you, guys.
So I just want to close this out by really thanking the panelists for their time and their comments. I hope that everybody here got something that they could take back to their communities in the short term, medium and long term to really impact. Okay. Never.
I told you y'all had to have a personal plan. We didn't get a chance to kind of summarize what the 5 most important things were, but you heard a lot of things, and I am charging each and every one of you to go out and make a difference. Each one of you can do it, and I'm charging you to go out and make a difference. I don't sit down and say
Okay, great. Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Again, the theme that was talked about quite a bit was getting involved in your community, getting involved doing your MPO. I'll give you a personal example for myself. The MPO here in DC is called the Metro Washington Council on Governments, and I'm actually involved on both their Access for All Advisory Committee on the Transportation Planning Board and also for the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee for their Air and Climate Council. So I got a charge to get involved, and I'm doing that right now. So that shows that even me, I'm a little bit in young 30s, so I'm still in the millennial range, and I got involved in my community early with these issues. So anybody young and old can get involved. So again, I just want to close with thanks and for everybody coming out. I do want to point out BYD, one of our company sponsors, is actually providing electric vehicles that you could utilize to get around the conference in the city. So if you want to talk to Ms. Nashati down here and also one of his coworkers, Dr. Gerald Duncan, is that right? Austin, please inform them talk to them about what that service entails and how you can utilize it during the week. So again, thank you very much. As Deputy Secretary Johnson said, the panelists will be here for a bit to answer questions that you may not have gotten. And thank you very much. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.